presented for us. And so we're going to pick back up in our study on Baptist Faith and Message. And we looked at Article 10 on last things, and then we've kind of taken a detour out of that into the millennial view. So who needs a sheet? Look at that. I have 3 here. Anybody else? I have 2 now. Yes, sir. Last one. Oh, I have one extra one over here. Who else needs one? Anybody? Okay. So when we think about the millennium, what are we talking about? 1,000 years. Okay, Revelation 21 through 6, the 1,000-year reign of Jesus. And so we have looked at 3 views so far about that 1,000-year reign. The amillennial view, which says that reign is happening when? Anybody remember? It's now, in the present, okay? That it is the spiritual reign of Christ in heaven, and the saints who reign with him are those who have gone to be with the Lord, okay? That is the millennium right now. And then we looked at post-millennial, which says what? In reference to Christ's coming, when is the millennium? After, there you go, after, post, okay? So that is through the preaching and the spread of the gospel across the whole world, that Christ reigns in the hearts of those who are transformed by the gospel, okay? And that ushers in what's called a golden age of the millennium, where peace and righteousness reign and evil is restricted, because the idea is, as the gospel spreads, it transforms people, and as people are transformed, it transforms societies and communities. As societies and communities are transformed, nations are transformed, and as nations are transformed, the world is transformed. That's the idea behind postmillennialism. And then, after that spreading and preaching and success of the gospel throughout the world, then Jesus comes, okay? And then we looked at historical premillennialism. So premillennialism, what does it say in reference to the return of Jesus? Do I know? Yes, it does say that he comes one time, absolutely. Okay? So pre-millennium, that is, Jesus comes before the millennium, right? Pre-millennial. So Jesus returns, the second coming, and then he establishes that 1,000-year reign on the earth. And so tonight, we will begin to look at a second premillennial view. So the timing is the same in this view as the historical view, but this is called the dispensational view, okay? Dispensational premillennialism, okay? And what we'll see is there is some overlap between dispensational and historic premillennialism, but then we'll also see there's some pretty stark contrast and distinction within the 2 views, okay? Now, I don't plan to spend as much time on this view as I did the historical view, because my thinking is this is probably the view you're most familiar with, okay? The dispensational view. It's the most influential view of the last 100 years in America. This is the view. How many of you have read or seen the Left Behind series? How many of you read the book Left Behind? How many of you saw the movie Left Behind? Nobody, hardly nobody. Some of us have, okay. This is the view that is portrayed in the Left Behind series, okay. This is also the view of some great preachers of the last few years. So Adrian Rogers, how many of you have heard of Adrian Rogers? Okay. This was his view. This is what he believed. How many of you have heard of John MacArthur? This is his view. This is what he believes. How many of you have heard of David Jeremiah? This is his view. This is what he believes. So we're talking about some great preachers and thinkers. How many of you have read like some J. Vernon McGee commentaries? Okay, this is J. Vernon McGee's view. Warren Wiersbe. How many of you know Warren Wiersbe? This is his view as well. And so my thinking is you're probably familiar for the most part with this view. Okay? And so in a nutshell, this view teaches that there is a future rapture of the church before the tribulation. How many of you have heard that before? Okay. And then there is a literal 7-year tribulation on the earth after the church is gone. Okay. And during that time of tribulation on the earth, God sort of picks up and continues his dealings with Israel as a nation. So there's this distinction between Israel and the church in the dispensational view. So one way of thinking about it is, in the dispensational view, God has a spiritual people, and that is made up of Jew and Gentile who believe in Jesus. But also God has a physical people, and that would be those who are ethnic Jews. Okay, that is the dispensational view. And so when the church is raptured out, Jews are left in the world, and God continues his dealings with national Israel during that time. Okay, then there's the visible return of Christ, defeat of enemies, and then the establishment of his 1,000-year reign on the earth. So just as we've done with each view, we'll talk about what this view teaches, okay? And we'll look at the strengths of it and also the challenges it faces. And so where I would like to start is, what does that word dispensational even mean, right? Like that's where we need to start, okay? So how many of you have heard that word dispensation before? Anybody want a shot in the dark definition of what a dispensation is? All right, that's perfect. That is a perfect definition of a dispensation. It is a period of time in which God deals with people, okay? And I'll give you some examples of that in a minute, but the simplest definition of a dispensation would simply be a period of time, okay? A dispensation means a period, okay? A period of time. And so here's my definition: a period of time or system by which God manages or relates to the world. Okay? So one idea behind this that we see in dispensations, which Adelmo brought up, would be like God's dealings with people in specific, what do we call them? Starts with a C, ends with covenant. Covenant. Okay? Covenant. God deals with particular groups or individuals through covenants. We would say that would be a dispensation, okay? So this view fundamentally holds that God has worked in different ways in different eras of history, and those eras are known as dispensations. So a biblical dispensation is a distinct, divinely appointed period of time in which God manages human affairs and unfolds his plan of redemption. So traditionally in dispensationalism, there are 7 dispensations. Here they are. There's the dispensation of innocence, and that would be creation to fall. Okay? There is dispensation of conscience. That would be fall to flood. Dispensation of human government, post-flood to Abraham. Dispensation of promise, Abraham to Moses. Dispensation of law, Moses to Pentecost. And currently, we are in the era known as the dispensation of grace, which is the church age, which is Pentecost to, anybody want to take a guess? In dispensationalism? To the rapture, right, to the rapture. And then the last dispensation is the kingdom, and that would be that 1,000-year reign of Christ in the millennium, okay? So right now, according to dispensationalism, humanity is in the dispensation of grace, which means God relates to man on the basis of grace through faith in Jesus. Okay? And then that final dispensation will be the reign of Christ on the earth for 1,000 years. So the basic timeline, I think Andrew had it up there, and it's on your sheets as well if you have one. Here's a timeline. The church age now, from Pentecost to rapture, then rapture, then following rapture is what? 7-year tribulation, okay, 7-year tribulation. In dispensationalism, very strictly 7-year tribulation, okay? Because I taught you, remember, historic premillennialism believes in a tribulation, right? It's just the whole age of the church, the whole period of the church is the time of tribulation. Then after the 7-year tribulation, you have the second coming of Jesus. Then you have the millennial kingdom. Then you have the final rebellion, which Satan is loosed and then leads. Then you have final judgment, and then you have the eternal state, that is new heavens, new earth. Okay? Questions about that so far? That's kind of a big overview idea. Now, well, not really, right? I guess some, which I know I said traditional dispensationalism is 7. There's other forms of dispensationalism that says 10. There's some that says 12. And so what we're going to do when we walk through dispensational premillennialism is we're going to look at what most people who are in this believe, right? Because even within this, you look at the 7-year tribulation and the timing of the rapture. Some dispensational premillennials say, well, it happens 3.5 years into the tribulation. Anybody ever heard that before? Okay, yeah. Some even say it happens towards the very end of the tribulation period. Okay? So we're going to look at kind of the view that like Adrian Rogers and David Jeremiah, like those, the most widely held views within this view. Because if I did like every little stream out of it, like we would just be doing this study forever and ever. We would never move on to anything else. Okay. The 2 witnesses? No, they get killed during that tribulation period. They do. And that's another point. So in dispensational premillennialism, those 2 witnesses, I think that's in Revelation 11, isn't it? Isn't that Revelation 11, the 2 witnesses? Those are 2 literal witnesses on the earth testifying to the gospel. And most believe, anybody got an idea of who they believe those 2 witnesses are? Elijah, Enoch, or Moses. Some say Elijah and Moses, some say Elijah and Enoch. Do I know? He said it was who? Oh, I got you. No, I'm with you now. Okay. It says in the holy city. Uh-huh. Yes, but their message torments the nations. So, I don't. My view is the historic view, and in the historic view, the 2 witnesses are symbolic for the church, and it's the testimony of the church to Jesus throughout the age of the church, which is the tribulation. Okay. Anywho, okay. Let's walk through the distinctives of this view, okay? So the first 3 or 4 we'll get pretty detailed in, but then after that, this view is very much the same as the historical view, and then we'll kind of walk through those quickly. So here's the first distinctive of the dispensational premillennial view, and that is the rapture of the church. The rapture of the church, okay? This is one of the defining teachings of dispensationalism, okay? That before the tribulation, Christ comes for the church, okay? And then there is the 7-year tribulation. And the idea is that Jesus comes secretly, is one way to say it, or another way to say it is suddenly for the church. So how many of you saw the Left Behind movie? Okay, they depict the rapture in that, right? How do they depict it? Secretly, right? You don't see Jesus. It's just you're sitting beside someone, and next thing you know, they're what? They're gone. Okay, just gone. Okay, so that's why we call it the secret coming or a sudden coming for the church. And this event in dispensationalism is the rapture. So some key scriptures they point to, 1 Thessalonians 4:16, the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. The dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. Okay, so that word, that phrase in there, called up, is where the idea of rapture comes from. That's what it means, to be called up in. So in the dispensational view, believers are removed from earth where they meet Christ in the air, and then what happens after that? Do what? The tribulation starts on earth, and how long is it? 7 years. Where are believers during that time? In heaven with the Lord. Okay? So called up, taken out, removed, and then the time of tribulation begins after the church is removed. That's my view. Not for the rapture, not in the dispensational view. In the dispensational view, it's not a visible coming to the earth return. It is a secret calling up. Traditionally, dispensationalism says that is a parable about the rapture. My view is, if you go read it, I think it's a parable about judgment. The one that's taken is taken to the judgment, and the one that remains is the faithful. Yeah. Were destroyed in the judgment. Yeah. So I think the parable is about judgment, not rapture. And I think the reference to the flood affirms that. Yeah. But now dispensationalism has taken that and said that's about the rapture. And the one taken is taken to be with the Lord. But the parable is about judgment. And the one taken is taken into judgment, not to heaven. Okay. Sir? Not in the dispensational view, right? So what some people say, well, it's one return, but it's in 2 phases, right? And phase 1 is he comes and takes the church out. Yes, that's what this view says. Yes. Unbelievers will be resurrected at the end of the millennium for judgment. Okay. Okay, so at the rapture, in this view, Jesus doesn't come physically to the earth. He remains in the air, and he calls believers up to him, in which they are then taken into heaven. So another scripture dispensationals point to for this is John 14, 2 through 3. My Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. Okay? So, this is interpreted as Jesus taking believers to heaven to be with him before tribulation. Okay? Another scripture, 1 Corinthians 15, 51 through 52. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall all be changed. So at the rapture, when Jesus comes for the church, before the 7-year tribulation, dead believers are raised, they are glorified, believers alive are called up and transformed, and both, resurrected and changed, are immediately taken up to heaven. So technically that would come after he raptures the church, but it actually occurs when he comes back. Yes, and then he comes back with the church in this view, and then there's the battle. Which if you read Revelation 19, it's really not much of a battle at all. It's more of an annihilation than it is anything. Do I know? Some dispensationals hold that view. Yeah. Okay. But really, if you read it, it's all nations gathered together, not just one or two. All the nations gather together. That's right. All right, so dispensationalists, okay, distinguish between the rapture and the second coming. Okay, so in the rapture, Jesus comes in the air, he comes for the saints, and it's before tribulation. In the second coming, Christ comes to the earth, he comes with the saints, there's judgment against the nations, and all that takes place after tribulation. Okay? Does that make sense? No, that's after the 1,000-year millennial reign. What? I heard confused. That's all right. That's why we do this on Wednesday nights. Sure. 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 Right. And that's kind of what we've kind of reinforced throughout, is that you can hold to any four of these views and believe that Jesus is coming, judgment for unbelievers, glorification for believers, and however that works out, we'll just... This view. Mm-hmm. This is the view that's most popular. That's right. Well, so what someone who believes this view, dispensational, will say is there's just one return because Jesus only comes to the earth once physically. And so they differentiate between the rapture and the second coming, right? So The rapture doesn't count as second coming because he doesn't come to the earth. He's just in the air. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, of course, this is one of the major differences with the view we looked at last time, which is the historic view, which says Jesus comes one time, right? One time. And the dispensational view says 2 phases. Phase 1, rapture, when Christ comes for the church before the 7-year tribulation. And then phase 2 is the physical coming of Jesus to the earth with the church at the end of the tribulation. Okay? Do what now? Technically, yes, but not in the sense that a dispensational says, right? So, rapture just means to be called up. And so 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Thessalonians 4 all say, when Jesus comes, there is a catching up, a calling up. And so the amillennial view will say, yeah, that's a rapture. The postmillennial view will say, yeah, that's a rapture. My view, the historic view, says, yes, that's a rapture where we are called up to meet Jesus in the air, but then we're not taken away to heaven. He comes to the earth. There's the battle. Then there's the millennium. Mm-hmm. We pretty good with that so far? So far, so good. But the reason why on your sheet, the dispensational view actually says the word rapture is because that coming of Jesus is in 2 different phases, right? So in all the other views, the calling up, the being changed, his coming to the earth, that all happens in one event, not separate events. This is the view that separates it into separate events. Okay. Second distinctive of this view is the 7-year tribulation. Oh man, this is, let's put our thinking caps on, okay? We'll put our thinking caps on, all right? So after the rapture of the church to heaven, then on the earth, there is a 7-year time of tribulation. And the 7 years in this view is a literal period of 7 years on the earth. How many of you have heard that, 7 years on the earth? Okay. Where does that come from? Anybody know? Somebody said it. Who said it? What'd you say? Daniel. Daniel chapter 9. Let's start there. Daniel chapter 9, that's the primary text. We're going to read it, and then we'll walk back through it and try to piece it together. Okay, Daniel chapter 9. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. And for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. All right, this passage is absolutely central to dispensational premillennialism. Okay? Because this is where a future 7-year tribulation, a future antichrist, and a distinction between Israel and the church is mostly found. Okay, so let's slow down a minute and dwell in Daniel chapter 9 for a little bit. Okay, so think about, can anybody tell me what the context is in the book of Daniel? What's going on in the book of Daniel? Do I know? That's right. Gabriel is giving Daniel prophecy here, okay? But think about it. Where is Daniel? Is he in Jerusalem? He's in Babylon, okay? So Babylon has come. They've destroyed Jerusalem. They've destroyed the temple. And they took the people into exile in Babylon. That's where Daniel is, okay? And he is grieved, and he's praying. In Daniel chapter 9, he's praying, and he is confessing sin. He's confessing Israel's national sin. And he's praying, and he's asking about the fate of God's people, okay? And he wants to know what Israel's future is, okay? And that's when Gabriel comes, and he gives Daniel this prophetic timeline, okay? So in Daniel 9:24, he says this: 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city. Okay? Now, I said this is one of the main places where a dispensational will say that there is a distinction between the church and Israel. Okay? Because they say your people to Daniel has to deal with who? National Israel, the nation. And then they'll say, he says, your holy city, which would be what? Jerusalem. Okay? So, a dispensational says, this prophecy given to Daniel is about national Israel, not the church. This is a prophecy to Israel. Okay? Now let's ask the question. So a dispensational will first say this prophecy has to deal with who? National Israel. Okay. Secondly, what does the angel mean when he talks about weeks? The Hebrew word means 7. How many days are in a week? 7. Okay. So dispensationalists interpret these as 70 weeks of years. So how long is a week of years? 7. So I think I have some math up there for us, Drew. I think I put it up there. 1 week equals what? 7 years. So 70 weeks times 7 equals what? 490 years. Okay. Now let's talk about the structure of these 70 weeks, because when we were reading, the angel starts dividing these weeks up, right? There's a week here, then there's 62 weeks here, then there's 7 weeks. Or I did that backwards. 7 weeks, 62 weeks, 1 week. Okay? So, the first 69 weeks, that's 7 weeks and 62 weeks, equals 483 years. And Daniel 9:25 says, from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem. So when does this week's begin? From the time, that's right, from the time Israel is released from exile to go rebuild Jerusalem. That's when the weeks start. That's what the angel says, right? These weeks start here. So think the book of Ezra. The book of Ezra. Ezra and some exiles are granted permission to return to Jerusalem and to rebuild the city, right? Well, they start with the temple, and then Nehemiah comes and rebuilds the city. Okay, but that's when this starts. That's when the weeks, this countdown of the 70 weeks begins. Okay? And then this 69 weeks culminates in the coming of the anointed one, which would be who? Jesus. That word anointed one in Hebrew, anybody know what it is? Messiah. Okay, so look at Daniel 9:26. After the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off. See that? Now, dispensationalists understand this as the death of Jesus. The anointed one will be cut off. That would be the death of the Messiah, the crucifixion. Okay? Then the verse says, the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And then this is typically interpreted to be, anybody got an idea? So think about it for a minute. Daniel's in exile. He's wondering about the fate of Jerusalem. What's going to happen? And the Lord says, here it is, through Gabriel. Okay? Going to return, rebuild it. There's this period of time between that and the anointed one when he dies. And then someone will come and destroy the city. What city is this in reference to? Jerusalem, the one that was rebuilt. So it's going to be destroyed again. And the sanctuary, that means holy place. It's talking about the what? The temple. Does anybody know of a period in history when the city of Jerusalem was sacked and the temple was destroyed after Jesus died? AD 70. AD 70. And so that's how dispensationals interpret that. The Roman destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. That's what Gabriel's just telling Daniel about. Now, there's a key piece that we have to keep in mind here. Because the math on that is actually, anybody know? It's 69 weeks. So that means there's one outstanding week after this. Okay? And so in dispensationalism, you have this gap of time. Okay? And this is a crucial feature that after the 69th week in Daniel, that prophetic clock pauses. And it creates a gap between the 69th and the 70th week. Okay? Now, a dispensational says that gap in time is the church age. Are you with me on that so far? It's the age of the church. Okay? So, let's think about Daniel's 70 weeks. So the time period is 69 weeks completed, and that is at the end of Jesus' life. Okay? And then there's this gap that is the church age. So here's the question. When is the last week? Which that week in Daniel would equal how many years? 7 years. It's the tribulation. Right? It's the tribulation. That final week prophesied in Daniel after the 69th week and after the age of the church is the 7-year tribulation. That begins when? After the church is raptured. Okay? Are you with me so far? All right. So how many of you have heard that before? Like you've been taught that? Anybody? Okay. Be rad. All right. Some of us have. Okay. So, one thing I do want to point out, okay, is that this gap of time is not explicitly stated in Daniel 9, right? Like there's no reference to a gap in Daniel chapter 9, okay? Rather, dispensationals infer that there's this gap that creates this 7-year tribulation. They'll take from other scriptures, right? Like, one thing Daniel 9 mentions is that something's going to happen in the middle of this week, right? Really? Okay. So, yes, every dispensational premillennial, no matter what stripe, believes that there's this gap between the 69th and the 70th week in Daniel, and that's the tribulation. Yeah, right. How many of you have heard that, you take the release of exiles back to Jerusalem to the death of Jesus, and you get that 69 weeks of years? How many of you have heard that before? Anybody? Yeah. Okay. And then, after the death of Jesus, you kind of have this pause on the clock. Okay. It's still sitting at 69 weeks. Okay. And then during that pause, you have the age of the church, the dispensation of grace that we're in right now in dispensationalism. And then, what is it that starts the clock back ticking for that final week? Bradley said it. It's the rapture. It's the rapture. And then the clock resumes, and that last week, that 70th week in Daniel, is the 7-year tribulation on earth. We're in the pause. We're in the gap. Yeah, we're in the gap of time, right? The clock paused when Jesus died, and that was the end of the 69th week. And then there's a pause until Jesus comes and raptures the church, and at that point, play is hit again, and then that final week, that last 7 years, plays out during the time of tribulation. Yes. Everyone not a believer. That's right. Like if you're if you hold to the dispensational view, you want to be out of here, right? Let me make a note here because we're out of time. But are there other questions before we just close here? Or what if I just showed it to you real quick? Like so quick you won't even know we did it. Okay? That the 70th week is that tribulation. The final week of 7 years is still in the future. So Daniel 9:27 says, "And he shall make a strong covenant with many for" how long? 1 week. Okay? And for half of the week, which would be how long? 3.5 years. He'll put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. And so, in the dispensational view, this would be Antichrist. But if you're a dispensational, you don't, because that 70th week is the tribulation. We're in the pause. We're in the gap of time between the weeks. We are not in a week in the dispensational view. In my view, we are in the 70th week now. The tribulation is now. Yeah, that's the historical view. But that's not the dispensational view. Right. Okay, other questions? All right, we'll finish talking about the time of tribulation next time. I have quite a bit on that. And then another key distinction we'll talk about in dispensational is the distinction between Israel and the church. Okay, that's key in this view as well. Last word or thoughts?